Just say a couple things about Roger. I first got to know him back in the mid-90s, I think, was when I first was around you. We were both youth leaders back then, and only one of us had the courage to stay with being a youth leader, and that was Roger. He's amazing. He's an amazing leader in our denomination for our young people, and we are so blessed to have him here in Mid-America. And he has the gift of relating to everyone. And so hearing about his story and his journey, I think, will be a blessing to all of us. I'm looking forward to this myself.
Thank you so much for those kind words of introductions also, and I'm glad to be here.
You're a blessing here. So why don't you just start out, tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised, and a little bit why you are who you are.
Oh, well, I'm an island boy, born on the island of Trinidad, which is the most southerly Caribbean island in the Caribbean Sea. It's a twin island state, Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm a third generation Seventh-day Adventist. So I grew up, my grandmother lived right at the bottom of the hill where the church was, and what church is still there today. And she was the post office. She was the mailbox for the church, the key holder. She, as a deaconess, she made the communion bread. So I've been around the church all my life. And so I love this church. I can't think of any other place that I would find myself, believe in. If I left the church, I'm not going to anywhere else because I didn't know anything else. So I'm glad to be in the church. Now I'm working for the church, working for God actually, but through his church. So I'm excited about that. So we migrated to the United States. Being in the Caribbean, being outside the United States, people come here for the dream, to live the dream. And so my parents, my mother in particular, wanted to have another opportunity, and so she came to the United States. She left me in Trinidad for a little bit, so I had this angst of growing up and wanting to be with her and getting here. And so when I finally got here, I was happy. Moved to New York City. In New York was a little cosmopolitan West Indies atmosphere. So I kind of transported from Trinidadian culture to America, to Brooklyn, to another West Indian Trinidadian culture. So I didn't see much of a difference when I got here. There were things that were happening around in New York, but it didn't really bother me because I had a church that looked like the church I had in Trinidad. I lived among people that looked like the people I lived in Trinidad. I heard the dialect, I had the food. So I really did not miss much when I first got to the States. It was great. I enjoyed living in New York. But I learned very quickly that was just New York. That was not America. And the reality of America's history became real to me when we moved to Washington, D.C. Oh. And once we moved to Washington, D.C., different issues came up, even within the church.
Tell us a little more about that. What kind of issues?
So I moved from New York, as I shared, living in the West Indian mindset of the culture there in New York. So when I moved to Washington, it wasn't as pronounced there as it is in New York. I joined a church that the pastor came to New York to preach for Week of Prayer. And we were, my mom and I were like, yeah, that's the church we want to go and join when we went back to when we moved to Washington, because we made that journey. When we got there, we realized that the church was predominantly African-American, wasn't West Indian. So I was I may look like the people, but I was not like the people. But I mean, it wasn't any bad thing. No bad things came to me in terms of comments or anything at first. I joined Pathfinders, was involved in the Pathfinder program. And it was on a camping trip that a comment was made in a sense of maybe I needed to go to this other church, which was more a West Indian, predominantly West Indian culture. And that was kind of jarring in my understanding of what's there was a problem. And then my journey began with looking at the history of the African American and the West Indians and the culture, the white culture, the Caucasian culture, and found out that there was some problems. Even in 1984, there were some problems. I eventually moved my membership or moved my allegiance from that one church to the more West Indian church, where I felt more included, more encouraged. I don't have any hard feelings with the African American church, because it was that issue that when I made my decision to be a pastor in this church, I chose the fact that I would have to pastor African Americans. And so I needed to become the kind of pastor that understood them, understood their journey, understood what was going on, their history. And so that put me on a path to really understanding the hurt, the history, where they came from, what was it about of the African American in North America. And I am excited that I did that, because I learned a lot. Sure. And I was willing to pastor any and everybody, because I realized that I'm not in Trinidad anymore. And so,
Or Brooklyn.
Or Brooklyn.
Mini Trinidad.
That's right.
So, I think one of the things that drew me to you when we were both youth directors, you have a gift of, I think, getting along with everyone very well and making everyone feel very at ease. I bet in your wildest dreams you never knew God would call you to Mid-America.
Ooh, yeah.
And you come here, it's a long ways from Brooklyn.
It is.
Even Washington, D.C. And we have our urban areas, but we have a lot of rural areas. And you are our union church ministries director and spend much of your time with our young people in all of our conferences. How does it feel when you go and you're the only one who looks like you do when you go into one of the places that you're ministering to, you're called to minister to? You go to one of our conferences and you're the only one that looks like you in the whole building. How does that make you feel, and how do you feel you're accepted? And tell me a little bit about how that must be for you.
Well, I have to be honest. It is a little jarring at first, but I thank God for the journey He has put me on, because over the years I found myself being the only one. He has allowed me to be on committees, particularly representing the African American voice. He has allowed me an opportunity to speak in other ethnic churches, Hispanic, Caucasians, and being received and accepted as one of them. So I have had that experience. So coming to Mid-America was a little easy, because I've experienced it before. It is a little jarring because you're not sure what they're expecting, and that's my biggest thing. What are you looking for? What are you expecting? And that's my thinking. I realize that I tend to be a little more apprehensive on, what am I going to say that's going to, I don't want to say something that puts it in a different, that I make people feel uncomfortable. As you were sharing there about the journey, in terms of where I've been, one of the things that I realized was that I have to look for commonality among each people group that I get involved with. And one of the biggest things that I found that works well is food. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe that's why I'm carrying all this weight. But I enjoy eating. There was a gentleman that made a joke for me: "Do you live to eat, or do you eat to live?" But the foods are what helps to bridge that differences. So if I can, when I'm on my Hispanic families, hey, I'll eat a pupusa. And they laugh when I share, hey, I want to come and get some pupusas, and they'll make it, and we'll eat together and talk. And in youth ministries, I realized that I'm ministering to second generation, third generation individuals, but they carry their cultural baggage with them. And so I need to know about that. Even as a West Indian, I need to know about the African American culture that I mainly ministered to prior to my coming to the Mid-America Union, being in a regional conference. So I had to learn about, especially the blacks in the South, what makes it different. I mean, when I went to school at Oakwood, seeing the cotton fields, whoa, it was mind blowing. When we did a youth event in the city of Montgomery, and they showed us where the slave boats came up right less than a mile from the auction block, where they would bring the slaves, take them off the boat, package them in the buildings on the way up to where they would auction them off, which was right down the street from where Martin Luther King started in the church there in Montgomery, which is in the shadow of the Montgomery, the state's capital. I mean, it's just like the history just interconnected. And then right around the corner from where the auction block is where Rosa Parks worked, and the bus stop where she got on the bus and didn't get off, didn't move her seat. So it became very real to me, and knowing and learning these things and being exposed to these things taught me how to understand different cultures, and it was a joy to feel comfortable ministering. So when I connect with an African American congregation, I may be Trinidadian, I may come from the Caribbean. I don't necessarily wave those flags, but to them, I'm an African American who is involved in their struggle, and consider the table and eat the greens and the cornbread and the things that they eat, that they know, and they introduce that to me. And then I could introduce to them the roti and the curry chickpeas. I don't want to say curry chicken. No, the curry chicken. I could introduce to them my culture. And being from Trinidad, it's very heavily, it's a very diverse country with East Indians. I think I live the best life in light of the fact that the cultures that make up what I know gives me the opportunity to minister in a very diverse field like Mid-America Union.
Very interesting. Well, yeah, I can tell you, your youth directors are talking about you behind your back.
Oh my!
and it's all good. They love you.
Praise God.
You've made a real impact on their lives, and they appreciate you, all cultures that you work with. So I got, two things sparked in my mind when you were talking there. You went through quite a journey from Trinidad, Brooklyn, Washington, learning, went to Oakwood. You had a chance to be exposed to a lot. I'm interested in two things here. One is, have you experienced in your own journey some real negative instances because of racism?
Yes, I have. A couple of things. One, I remember my wife and I, we moved to Huntsville, Alabama. We were going to Oakwood, and we were looking for housing. And we saw that this house was available for rent. And so we went to look at it. When we called, everything was great, no problem. Yeah, we look forward to seeing you come. When we got to the house, all of a sudden, things had changed. And at first, you're kind of like, what happened, you know? But when you kind of look at the large picture, when you sit back and pull it back, you realize, wow, this thing is real. It is actual real. You really, there is racism in this world. And so I believe though the landlord or the owners just felt like they did not want to rent to an African American.
How did it make you feel?
I felt less than normal, you know. I felt second class. I believe this is how many blacks felt when they were, when prejudice was real. I mean, it still is real, but when they came up against it, you know, people would shoot just because of the color of their skin. It was, but I kind of got over it because I found myself among my people, and they were very encouraging, and we looked past that. The hardest thing for me is when I felt the racism in the church. Oh. Outside, I could say, okay, yes, that's what's supposed to happen, because they don't read the same Bible. Well, maybe they do, but they're not reading the same Bible I'm reading. They're not going to church on Sabbath, and so they're different. And I'm not trying to knock people who are not in the church in any way, shape, or form, but I'm not expecting the same sense of camaraderie as I do with my brothers and sisters within the church. When it happened in the church, that's when it became tough.
Can you tell us about one of those times? And maybe it's hard to, but maybe
it's not that I just don't want to name anybody.
Sure.
But we were looking at doing a ministry at Oakwood, and there was a particular leader who was kind of like, well, we don't need that ministry, and it was kind of a sense of, we don't need you. Yeah. And I was like, wow, in the church, really? That's the way you're thinking? And that opened my eyes to the fact that people are people. And I may have put too much into, oh, you're a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we love Christ, we're all together, we're striving for heaven. But I began to realize that people are people, and not everybody sees it my way or sees it in my benefit. And so ever since then, it's been a constant battle of fighting against being totally mad and disgusted and want to turn my back, walk away. I've got to look at them and in an individual situation, that person's ignorance or that person's misunderstanding. And it has helped. Since that first incident, if I don't get something, maybe it's because of my color, I don't know. That's been the toughest, to second guess. If I didn't get something, is it because of my color? Is it because I didn't meet a certain standard? Right. And that's the scary part, to always have that in the back of your head. Do I belong here? And so the second guessing, because of the problems of racism, it has caused me to do a lot of second guessing, because I don't know.
Because you can't always read the heart and mind of the person you're working with, and what's causing them to act the way they act. I get that. That's got to be very challenging. You work with our young people. I've been very impressed with the young people who've been in America and their response to what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd. You were part of it. You went up there and part of that peaceful protest and community service that has taken place.
And still taking place.
And still, absolutely. And not just in Minneapolis, but in other places too with our young people. It's incredible. What can you say? Because I think you're way more the expert than most of us in the church on this because of your background and where you sit and who you ministered with. What do you see generational differences? That the young people that you're working with that are in their early 20s, late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, compared to the generation that looks more like me, are you seeing good signs and progress? Are there things that we could be hopeful about?
What I'm sensing and what I'm coming up against is the fact that they're asking good questions. They're forcing me at this age to really go back and understand why we're in the situation we're in, or how did we get here. So I've been reading, I've been listening, I've been looking at stuff on social media, in the internet, doing studies, trying to figure out a way to answer the question. If we are, a lot of them ask this question, if we are all one church, why do we have two conferences? Why do we have a difference in the way we worship and things like that? And so and they're not willing to accept the answer. Well, that's the way things are. They push you. Why can't we work? And they have shown in many circumstances that it doesn't matter to them that you're a different color. You're my friend. I hang with you, But then when they're pushed against the grain, when things like the situation, I shouldn't call it just a situation, when the murder of George Floyd happened, it forces them to young people begin to question their church. And the response we had in Minneapolis was not just a response for them personally, to say, hey, we are against this kind of behavior. It was a way for them to feel comfortable with their church, helping them to have the response. And I was glad to be a part of that, to be willing to step out front with them and say, hey, we're willing to come, we're willing to move out of our comfort zone and say, with our church, this is not right. And they really surprised me, because a lot of folks were concerned. We're gonna start a fight. We're gonna draw this element that's going to cause a problem. Oh, when we walked up to George Floyd's memorial, the intersection there, and they were singing the song "We're Marching to Zion." It brought tears to my eyes, bring tears to my eyes right now, that our young people, sometimes we think, the text comes to mind, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. Oh my goodness, it is so true. The Bible, that text is so true. Our young people, if we share with them the word of God from young, they will not depart from it. They may show it in a different way. they may deal with it, they may exert it in a way that we are not used to it. And we say, wait a minute, that doesn't fit the way I feel comfortable with it. But they are making the gospel real for them, and I appreciate that. And that's a new journey I'm on here now, is to make sure that I could give them the correct historical perspective, but then stand with them and worship with them and move the needle along with them, because they are the church of today. They are making the impact today. They are the new leaders of today. And if we're not careful, keep them back, we're going to end up with no church.
Well, they're doing good things for us, because they are, I believe, asking us to be honest with ourselves,
right,
and face things that we ought to face, because we can do better if we face them and we truly act like children of God in these regards. Two more questions for you, and that may lead to some other thoughts too. But you've had a rich history in the Adventist Church. And you know, what a marvelous background. You've experienced so many things, more than most of us. What's your counsel? What can we do as a church to help promote healing and understanding right now?
Wow, that's interesting. I think what we're doing, having a conversation, some of the questions you've asked me today, I really never processed before. Being a West Indian coming to the United States, I never had the opportunity to see the differences between leadership and the laity. So my leaders in Trinidad when I was coming up were black. My president was black, my governor general, the prime minister, my leadership in the country were black. So coming to the States and realizing that, hey, whites are leaders and blacks are not. And then the few blacks that became leaders, they were fighting for such equality. And that was a new struggle for me. And to then see it in the church, that many of our leaders, our upper echelon leaders are Caucasian, and blacks are very scarce in that leadership. It's a tough way to kind of balance out. So a conversation, yes, is one thing. The other thing that I think our church needs to do is to be real with the reality of what it is and of what we are facing. So there needs to have some conversation. Now, on the other hand, and you've heard this from my conversation to you and to the group as we were putting this together, that it has to also be a two-way street. Because I don't think that the problem is all African American and we have to get an understanding of the African American. I think African Americans need to get an understanding of Caucasians. You touched on it a little bit with our young people, this generation. There is a whole way of thinking that's different than what we've had. You know, how I felt in the 80s is different than what is going on here in the 2000s. And if I kept that 80s mentality, 70s, or even the 60s mentality, I am so out of touch with what's happening here in the 2000s. And so there has to be this cross-training or intergenerational training that allows me to understand what a Caucasian is feeling, what a Caucasian is, where they're coming from, what is their background, why do they think that way, and I think our church is in a position to help us with that because we have so many diverse cultures within the church, and we can't stay in our silos. We have to begin to learn each other and connect with each other and talk about the differences we have, because it's through the differences, I think, that brings us together. We realize that our children are talking the same talk. They're dealing with the same feelings. They're struggling with the same hurts, and sometimes we feel we're different, we're better, we're not in that thing. But when we really begin to dialogue and share and understand, we realize that we're the same. And our church can help us with that because we don't have to fuss about the philosophy. You know, as when I was growing up in New York, I loved church so much that I would go to church. I shared this with my mom. She said this really touched her. I would go to church Saturday and Sunday, involved with Pathfinders and on Sunday and things like that. But Monday to Friday, I'm yearning for the next weekend. Although I'm in school with people who I like and, you know, enjoying the learning, it was not the same until I got back together with my friends at church. And so there was a way of laughing with them. The jokes were clean. You know, we didn't have to worry about, I didn't have to give an explanation why I don't eat certain foods, why I don't do certain things. So that allows us to really get into why I feel the way I feel, or what am I doing, where I came from, where we want to go. And so the generational culture today with our young people are asking certain questions that my generation are not really prepared to answer. But I believe that if we get prepared, we can help them, and they can help us in understanding how to deal with racism in the 2000s.
You're making me hungry in this pandemic to be able to fellowship fully again. You know, you described the joy of church and fellowship,
Yes.
what that meant to you.
Yes.
And I've been missing that so much in this pandemic.
So true. So
I think
true.
all of us have been missing that a great deal.
But maybe the pandemic is forcing us to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Because if we didn't have the pandemic and kind of isolated, and things like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and those issues, Ahmaud Arbery, if those issues didn't come up, we would have stayed in our own silos. And I would see you I'll see you in the week at the office. Hey, Gary, how you doing? And then on the weekends we weren't connecting. But we have had opportunities to connect at the local church here when they had a vigil. We sat on the lawn together. We were able to talk about now this issue of racism, this issue that's plagued our church, because it's an individual thing and not a system thing. And then let me quickly say that we want to change the system, but not really want to change the people, and the people are what needs to happen in order to change this racism.
Well, what you said, I've really seen even firsthand in my own family. I have a couple millennials for sons, and I love them both. They're not going to let us get by with just not talking about it.
True.
And church is the safest and best place to do that. And if we can do that with our arms around each other, maybe as a church we can make some real progress, and hopefully be an example to the world of what it means to love one another.
Right.
So let me ask you one more question here. And I think you uniquely can be a blessing to me and hopefully those that are listening in here because of your journey. You've had quite a history, Roger. You've experienced a lot of different cultures in a lot of different ways, more than most of us. But you're talking to a gentleman who, I'm a white man, and I grew up in this church, in this country. What would you say to me? What would you like me to know? What do you wish that I understood about the African-American journey that I don't understand, that will make and help me be a better person and more able to be inclusive and loving to everyone I come in contact with? What would you say to me?
The first thing that comes to mind is that my struggle, my issues, they're real issues. It may not be the same issue that maybe you have experienced, but it's real to me. It's not made up. It's not, oh, that's not true. I've heard, black people feel, I've heard that when those comments of black people feeling oppressed today, people say, oh, no, that's not true. That's not happening now. And so Caucasians are kind of brushing it away because they don't see that, because that's not happening. Yeah, right. There's no protests. You can do whatever you want. You can go everywhere you want, things like that. But the struggle is still real. There are still, police still pull you over. They treat me different than they treat you. I think I'm seen different. And so when I express those things, they're real things, and I hope and wish my white brothers and sisters can appreciate that. Because me personally, I'm not talking about anyone else, me personally realize that white folks go through the same things, in terms of they having struggles and having to deal with things that may be the same things I'm dealing with. We may not align the same way, but there are still nuances in our lives that helps us to be human. And that's all I want to be, is a human being, living here on earth, preparing for his soon return, and living with my brother, much less white brother, but my brother, in preparing for that. And your perspective, the way you grew up, the experiences you have, can help me to be prepared and inspire me and prepare me for his soon coming. But my experiences can also inspire you and prepare you. And so, but in order for that to happen, it has to be, well, yeah, he's going through something that's real, and it's real to him. And I have to be there for him. I have to understand that. And I may not really get it at first, but I'm going to strive to understand what he's going through. And that's my biggest thing.
Well, thank you for that. And I do take that to heart. We can learn so much when we sit and talk. I think one of the first things I realized that I didn't realize was almost every one of my African-American friends. And I started asking because I just didn't realize how prevalent it was. Every one of them have a story to tell me about when they were pulled over and how fearful that was and what happened to them. Some pretty remarkable stories that we don't have time to talk about here. But that was one of the first things that made me realize I need to learn more and I need to understand more. And Roger, you've helped us so much today. You're one of those very gifted people, like I said, who no matter who you're with, you feel you're with a friend.
Praise God.
And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I hope you feel that way around me as well. And so together we're going to continue to grow, and hopefully we'll continue to see our church wrap its arms even tighter around one another, no matter what our background is, and move together in concert in such a way that the world is going to look and say, those are Christ's disciples because they love one another. And that's the goal, isn't it?
That and also the other goal, well done. I hope that our willingness to build a bridge to understand each other gets us that much closer to the kingdom. Because when we get to the kingdom, this stuff got to be squashed. As I heard in pop culture one time, the guy said, the beef between us got to be cooked and eaten. So we have got to do better. And let me quickly say that I appreciate your leadership, Gary, in terms of the statements you made and the heartfelt conversations that we have had about racism and about unity and bringing together and understanding each other. It has helped me, and it has made it easier to minister in this field because I know my leader, I know where my leader is, and I know where he wants to take us, and that makes it easier to lead as being an African American in the leadership role. So I thank you for that.
Well, we're in this thing together.
Yes, sir.
And together we're going to see this work finished, and we're going to go home together.
Praise God.
And there won't be any beef. Maybe some chopless or something. We'll make sure all that's taken care of. Yes. But thank you, Roger. You're a jewel, and Mid-America is grateful you're here.
Thank you.
God bless, and thank all of you for listening in. And I pray that this has blessed you on your journey as we together learn more about each other, and therefore can bring greater understanding and greater love for one another. God bless.